Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is The Incredible Hulk 3, cover dated September of 1962. This issue marks the first appearance of the Ringmaster and his Circus of Crime, and was written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby. Our issue opens up with a striking splash panel, showing the Incredible Hulk as he's pounding on an unbreakable concrete wall. He's trapped in an underground chamber, built specifically to contain his immense strength. Yet he was not placed there by a dastardly villain, but by his other self, Bruce Banner. In these early days, the Hulk's transformations were triggered by the dawn of sunset. Thus Banner has constructed this chamber, which he enters every night, so that when the Hulk emerges, he's confined away from society. But if this cell can truly withstand the strength of the Hulk, then how can Banner possibly exit himself? Well, this is where Rick Jones comes in. For those unaware, Rick is the Hulk's only friend, and the person responsible for his creation. The origin of the Hulk is covered later in the issue, but what's important to know is that Rick's life was saved by Banner. But in doing so, Banner was exposed to an incredible dose of radiation, thus leading to the Hulk. So to repay the debt that he owes him, Rick has sworn to help Banner in any way that he can, including opening the Hulk's chamber every morning and closing it every night. He's actually just finished doing the latter, and is now walking back to Banner's cottage, where he's been staying overnight. But on the way there, he's intercepted by a group of soldiers from the nearby Los Diablos missile base. They're on orders to take him in. Orders from General Thunderbolt Ross. He's the base's commanding officer, and has become obsessed with destroying the Hulk. So seeing as Rick is the only person that the Hulk somewhat trusts, Ross is desperate to use the boy to get to the monster. Thus when the two meet, Ross doesn't try to force any information out of Rick, but simply asks for his help. He explains that the base has just received a new, and incredibly important missile, yet no living pilot can withstand its incredible G-force. The only person who could possibly survive its launch is the Hulk, and it's thus imperative that Rick somehow convinces him to pilot it, for the sake of national security. While Rick is nervous about the whole thing, he can't refuse an opportunity to aid his country. So he agrees to help, and once sure that no one's following him, heads back to the underground chamber. But Ross has misjudged Rick's relationship with the Hulk, as the teenager knows that he won't be able to reason with the monster. Thus there's only one thing for him to do. Release the Hulk and try to lure him into the rocket. So that's exactly what he does, as he leads a rampaging Hulk through the desert and to the base. He eventually lures him into the missile itself, as he places his jacket inside its cabin, and fools him into believing that he's climbed inside. So when the Hulk enters to pursue him, he finds himself trapped, as Ross orders the cabin to be sealed, and for the missile to be immediately launched. So just like that, his plan has succeeded, as the Hulk's now on a never-ending course away from Earth. The whole story about needing to test an important missile was a fake, just an excuse to get Rick to cooperate. But that doesn't matter now, all that matters is that the Hulk will never again menace the Earth. But while he may never return, the Hulk's story is not over yet. Well, it actually is, as the sun's unfettered rays have transformed him back into Bruce Banner. But this change is only brief, as the unshielded missile then enters a vast belt of cosmic radiation. This radiation bombards Banner's body, and triggers a mutation not unlike the one that had created the Hulk. But before we witness its effects, let's shift our focus back to Rick Jones. He's just overheard a startling conversation between Ross and his soldiers, in which the old general admitted to having sent the Hulk on a pointless course to nowhere. Not wanting his friend to perish in the emptiness of space, Rick, while Ross and his men are distracted, begins messing with the missile's control panel. Whether intentionally or not, he ends up flipping a switch that remotely detaches the missile's cabin from its rocket, thus sending the Hulk's capsule back to Earth. But in the process, a strange bolt of radioactive energy somehow strikes him. It's come all the way from the missile, yet for now, doesn't seem to have had any effects. So Rick brushes it off and heads outside, as the Hulk's capsule has just landed. But it's important to note that it's currently daytime, so when Rick approaches the missile's cabin, he expects to find Bruce Banner inside. But to his shock and horror, it's the Hulk who violently bursts his way out. Yet even more startling is the fact that the Hulk is now glowing a bright green. Rick tries to ask him what's happened, but the Hulk isn't in the talking mood. In fact, he's more angry than ever, and wants revenge. So Rick tries to run away, and while he may be faster than the Hulk, he can't keep up with the monster's limitless stamina. Thus he's quickly exhausted, and finds himself cornered on the edge of a cliff. So with no other option but to plead, Rick desperately begs the Hulk to stop. Yet amazingly, this actually works. It's as if the Hulk is now in some kind of hypnotic trance, totally beholden to Rick's every command. While at first confused, Rick eventually realizes that it must have something to do with the strange radioactive shock he received, as it's somehow given him control over the Hulk. So Rick commands the Hulk to follow him to Banner's cottage, where he plans to get some rest. Along the way, he realizes that whatever the Hulk went through in space has changed the nature of his transformations. It's obvious that moonlight is no longer the trigger, although Rick doesn't know what it now is, or if the Hulk will ever transform back into Banner. But he'll have to worry about that later, as right now he just wants to get some shut-eye. So he orders the Hulk to stay put in the cabin, and then falls asleep. Yet only minutes later, he awakens to the sound of a thundering crash. Looking around, he discovers that the Hulk is gone. But Rick doesn't have much trouble finding him, as he simply follows the brute's path of destruction. It leads him to a nearby town, where the Hulk is on a devastating rampage. So Rick, while dodging the fire of state troopers, gets close to the Hulk and commands him to flee. Obeying without hesitation, the Hulk grabs a hold of Rick, and mightily leaps out of town. They eventually land miles away in the middle of the desert, but they're close to Banner's underground chamber. So that's where Rick takes the Hulk, as he realizes that his control of him ends while he's asleep. He then orders the Hulk to enter its concrete cell, and like he'd done in nights past, seals him inside. That concludes this issue's first story, but there are two more. The next few pages are simply a recounting of the Hulk's origin, while the following 10 feature the Hulk battling the Ringmaster and his circus of crime. If you're only interested in the latter story, I've left a timestamp in the description that you can skip to. With that out of the way, let's travel back to the events of Incredible Hulk 1. It was in that issue that we were first introduced to Dr. Bruce Banner, a brilliant scientist working for the U.S. Army. He was about to test a powerful gamma bomb when Rick Jones foolishly drove onto the detonation range. Risking his own life, Banner rushed onto the range and ushered Jones to safety. But thanks to the meddling of a Soviet spy, the bomb detonated while he was exposed. Thus he was bathed in a torrent of gamma radiation, but miraculously, he survived. Except that he was changed, as he's now as much a monster as he is a man. A being mightier than a battering ram, more dangerous than a runaway tornado, and more unpredictable than the very forces of nature herself. The only person who knows his true identity is Rick Jones, the boy wearily sitting on the other side of an undersea dungeon. Perhaps the only thing on Earth that can hold the Hulk. With that, our third story can begin with a striking splash page, teasing the Hulk's coming battle with the Ringmaster and his circus of crime. But before we can witness such an epic showdown, we must first travel to the town of Plainville. Driving through its streets are a pair of FBI agents. They've been sent there to investigate the most peculiar thing, as all of Plainville's residents have been turned into living statues. Not literally, but they're all completely motionless, and won't react to any stimulus. Yet apparently Plainville is just one of many towns like it. The thing that connects them all is that they've been ransacked of valuables, and happen to have hung up the same poster for a traveling circus. So why don't we travel to that very circus, as the eccentric Ringmaster is welcoming his audience to the so-called greatest show on Earth. But even though it's just begun, he's already introducing its main attraction. It's his hat, which when stared at, puts people in a powerful hypnotic trance. Thus he directs the audience's attention right to it, and quickly places them all under his control. From there, he simply orders his performers to enter the crowd, and begin stealing any valuables. So they take jewelry, money, and watches, but this isn't enough for the Ringmaster. So he directs them to the town itself, and they begin looting anything of value. They take furniture, decorations, clothing, and stuff all of it into their caravan. They then leave for the next town, ready to repeat the process all over again. But with that, let's turn our attention back to Rick Jones. He's been up all night, trying to maintain his control over the Hulk. But he still has a life to live, so he orders the Hulk to stay put, and goes to see his Aunt Polly. His visit is a pleasant one, as he gets a chance to catch up with his aunt and freshen up. From there, he decides to take a walk through town, and happens to notice a small crowd gathered around a poster. It's advertising a circus, the Ringmaster's Circus. Not knowing any better, Rick decides to watch the show, and like so many before him, falls victim to the ringmaster's hypnosis. But while he's rendered completely immobile, his mind is still active for a few brief seconds. In that time, he sends out a desperate mental distress call, and while he's not sure if anything will come of it, it's luckily picked up by the Hulk. So the green behemoth then bursts his way out of the dungeon, leaps to the circus, and crashes through the ringmaster's tent. The startled performers then scramble to take him down, as they fire a human cannonball, and blast him with a power hose. The latter attack actually manages to stun him, as he's brought to the ground, and then shackled in nets and chains. This might come as a surprise to many, as it seems that the Hulk's been defeated by a simple burst of water. But it's not actually so simple. In truth, the Hulk is just waiting for his next order from Rick. Apparently the teenager wasn't very specific with his distress call, and thus the Hulk didn't know what to do when he got to the circus. That's why he didn't bother fighting back, and is just laying there motionless. But regardless, the ringmaster sees this as an opportunity, as he orders the Hulk to be loaded into one of their caravans. The next day, at a new town, they reveal him as their newest attraction. And his sight is surely one to behold, drawing a packed crowd to the circus. Thus it seems that the ringmaster is going to get away with his greatest heist yet. But just as he's about to cast his hypnotic spell, Rick and the pair of FBI agents barge in. Apparently the ringmaster didn't bother wiping the memories of his victims, so once they snapped out of their trance, they of course told the FBI about his scheme. But none of that matters now, as Rick then demands to know where the Hulk is. And on hearing his voice, the Jade Giant bursts out of his chains, and begins rampaging through the circus. In the ensuing confusion, the ringmaster manages to slip away, and begins fleeing in a golden chariot. So Rick orders the Hulk to stop him, and the brute then lifts the circus tent support pole out of the ground, and uses it to stop the ringmaster dead in his tracks. But then, just as the Hulk is about to pummel the villain, General Ross and a group of soldiers burst into the tent. So Rick orders the Hulk to get them out of there, and thus like before, the Hulk grabs a hold of Rick, and mightily leaps into the distance. The issue subsequently ends as General Ross raises his fist in the air, and angrily swears to destroy the Hulk no matter what it takes. While that concludes our issue for today, Marvel has also included a letter page. It was actually printed in the middle of the issue, but I've decided to showcase it at the end for today's video. But for those unaware, letter pages were once hallmarks of the comics industry in an age before the internet. They gave Marvel an opportunity to respond to the praise, criticism, and suggestions they'd received about their stories. All of the letters presented in this issue were sent by mail to Marvel over 60 years ago, and cover the Incredible Hulk 1. While I will not be reading the letter page aloud, please take a moment to look and see what readers of the time thought of this series. It's certainly an interesting experience all these years later. And with that, we've concluded The Incredible Hulk 3, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a solid story. Nothing really blew me away, but the issue was fun, and added several new and interesting elements to the Hulk character. Most importantly, it got rid of the idea that the Hulk could only transform at night. I'm glad they did this, as having it that way was just too limiting. Yet I'm skeptical of the whole Rick can control the Hulk thing. I thought the point of the Hulk was that he's supposed to be an uncontrollable monster. I'm interested to see how this plays out, but honestly hoping that it fades away sooner rather than later. In any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.